above all powers, above all kings, above all nature and all created things, above all wisdom and all the ways of man. You were here before the world began. Above all kingdoms, above all thrones, above all wonders the world has ever known, above all wealth and treasures of the earth, there's no way to measure what you're worth. Crucified and laid behind a stone, you lived to die, rejected and alone, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall and thought of me above all. Crucified, laid behind a stone, you lived to die, rejected and alone, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall and thought of me above all. Oh, you were crucified and laid behind a stone. You lived to die, rejected and alone, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall and thought of me above all, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall and thought of me above all.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
All right. Good morning. Good morning everyone. Isang maganda, mainit at makakalikasang umaga po sa ating lahat. You are now watching the 2022 Saliksik Hayagan organized by the University of the Philippines Los Baños, College of Forestry and Natural Resources. I am Eileen Peria from the Office of the Coordinator for Research, Extension, and Linkages, and I will be your facilitator for this morning's activity. For those who just came in, we just started the program with the morning prayer and the Philippine National Anthem. So now, I am sure everybody is excited about the new things that we will learn today. We are glad to see that we had some forestry students as participants. I heard some of them will be coming in later. May mga klase lang daw po. So we are all in for an intellectual treat today. As you can see, Saliksik is a Tagalog term which means research, and Hayagan means to share or convey the results. So please just sit tight and let us all learn together. So officially and warmly welcome us all to this webinar. Let us hear from our dynamic and energetic Dean of the College of Forestry and Natural Resources, Dean Marlo D. Mendoza. Good morning po, Dean.
Sa ating mga nanonood ngayon sa conference, no, we have more or less almost 40, but I'm sure a lot more will be coming, no? And to our colleagues, students, participants, and most especially to our four speakers, Dr. Marie Gabriel, Prof. Neil Libote, Dr. Asel Villamayor, Engineer Janet Grande, and of course to mga hardworking nating kasama sa OCREL, no? Isang mapagpala at makakalikasang umaga po sa ating lahat. Yesterday was the third day of our strat plan for 2022. As One United College, we have discussed, crafted, and prioritized plans, projects, and activities that will shape further the future of our college, especially by producing agile graduates and also other constituents of the university. But there is still work to be done to further refine the plans, and I look forward to a more streamlined and efficient accomplishment of targets and tasks together. We shall also be developing a more responsive monitoring and evaluation system to make sure that whatever we have discussed during the strat plan, we will be able to achieve the outcomes. This morning is definitely another welcome activity as the UPLB College of Forestry and Natural Resources celebrates its 112th founding anniversary with the theme, Creating a Future that Nurtures and Restores. This virtual Saliksik Hayagan 2022 puts to fore other important functions of the college and the university at large. So aside from instruction, of course, we have research and extension. As the national university, the CFNR recognizes its important role in revitalizing the country's forestry sector by embarking on strategic research and development, and equally important, disseminating R&D outputs. This morning's virtual Saliksik Hayagan features 4 of CFNR's bright, talented, and promising faculty members. I am excited, as most of you are, to listen to the insights of researches undertaken by the 4 academic units of the college. So Associate Professor Jessica, who is from IRNR, and Associate Professor Neil represents the Department of Forest Biological Sciences. And my colleague in the department, Dr. Asel, is from the Department of Social Forestry and Forest Governance, and Engineer Janet is from the Department of Forest Products and Paper Science. The 4 paper presentations are all very relevant topics, given the current challenges confronting the country's forestry sector. So the 4 papers will talk about causes of 4 decades of deforestation, impacts of forest transformation to bats, integrated landscape approach to climate change adaptation, and fabrication of cellulose acetate nanocomposite through electrospinning. So indeed, each of these topics are all very relevant given the context of the challenges the forestry sector of the Philippines is currently facing. Neil Armstrong once said, "Research is creating new knowledge, and we at the college remains committed to this pursuit in the context of multidisciplinary learning." I enjoin everyone to learn as much as you can and hopefully take home significant seeds of ideas for further research, extension, and development pursuits. Maraming salamat at isang mapagpalang umaga po sa ating lahat.
Thank you, Claudine. Thank you. Indeed, April is a very busy month for us at the college. But for today and for this morning, we are all looking forward to the presentations of our colleagues who each represent the 4 excellent academic units of CFNR. Before we start introducing the speakers, please allow my office mate, Forester Amelita Luna, to present the webinar house rules.
Good morning once again. Thank you, Eileen. The following are the conference house rules and reminders. First, this event is recorded. Second, participants are muted by defaults. Third, use chat box only for the questions. Fourth, identify yourself during live open forum. And fifth, evaluate conference to receive an e-certificate. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Tita Ami. Before we start introducing the speakers, please, may we request everyone to turn on their videos for a photo opportunity. Our office mate, Mr. Godofredo Ocampo, will take the lead in this documentation. So kindly turn on our video cams. Dean, kindly join us in this photo documentation. So, Kuya Toti, please take charge.
Good morning, everybody. Paki-open lang po and then count ako ng 3 and then photo ops tayo. Okay? 1 at Steve. Teka. Italin. 1, 2, 3, shot. Go. Okay. Wait for a while.
Then we have a second panel. Tama ba, Kuya Toti?
Yes, second panel naman.
Kindly turn on yung mga camera.
Okay. So, 1, 2, 3, go. Okay. Third panel naman. For a while. Okay, smile po ah. 1, 2, 3, go.
Thank you.
Next panel. Wala na ba?
Wala na. Kahit yung mga nakamask, nating mga kasamang participants ay
Okay.
nakasmile din. Tama ba? Salamat,
Yes,
Kuya Toti.
Okay.
Okay. So we're done with the photo documentation. Thank you, everyone. Let's start. For the brief introduction of our first lady speaker, let us listen to Mr. Louis Amongo, University Extension Specialist of OCREL, to give us a brief overview about the speaker.
Thank you, Ms. Eileen, for that. I'm sure everyone is excited to hear from these wonderful people, our faculties. Our first speaker is Forester Marie Jessica Gabriel. She is an assistant professor at the Institute of Renewable Natural Resources, College of Forestry and Natural Resources, and indeed one of the best and brightest BS Forestry graduates. Jessica is a forester and a cum laude graduate of the BS Forestry program of the University of the Philippines Los Baños. She also got 6th place in the 2017 Forest Licensure Examination. While an undergraduate student, she went to the University of British Columbia as an exchange student. Last year, she finished her dual master's degree in sustainable tropical forestry and forests and livelihoods at Bangor University, United Kingdom, and the University of Copenhagen, Denmark. She has been part of some research projects in CFNR, particularly in mapping Philippine mangrove forests and preparing watershed management plans. Her research interests include the use of remote sensing and GIS in natural resources management, forest livelihoods, and food security. Ladies and gentlemen, let's all listen as Ma'am Jessica shares highlights of her master's thesis on the causes of deforestation in the Philippines.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me today to share with you my master's thesis on the causes of deforestation in the Philippines from 1980 to 2020. This is the structure of my presentation. First, I will be providing you a background about what deforestation is. Then I will be sharing with you my methodology, then my results, and then I will be ending my discussion with my conclusion and then sharing you some of my recommendations. As defined by the Food and Agriculture Organization, deforestation is the conversion of forest to other land use or the permanent reduction of tree canopy cover below the minimum 10% threshold. And we all know that deforestation has an impact on biodiversity, ecosystem services, livelihoods, climate, and food security. When we look at global deforestation, there are various estimates on the extent of forest cover and also deforestation rates. And in 1970, Sommer and Myers provided an estimate on the deforestation rates. And according to Sommer, around 11 million hectares per year is being lost in 1970s. And this is different from Myers' estimate of 21 million hectares per year. And when you look at Global Forest Resources Assessment of FAO, they also provide different estimates of forest cover. And in terms of causes of deforestation, different studies also provide different causes of deforestation. For instance, Allen and Barnes mentioned that deforestation is significantly related to population growth, wood fuel extraction, and wood exports, but indirectly related to agricultural expansion. And according to Geist and Lambin in 2002, deforestation is caused by proximate and underlying causes, and agricultural expansion is one of them. Deforestation also varies geographically. So deforestation in Latin America is different with the deforestation in Africa, and also it is different in the deforestation in Asia. And this has led me to my research questions, wherein I wanted to know what is the real forest cover of the Philippines from 1980 to 2020, and also what are the causes of deforestation in the Philippines from 1980 to 2020. And I use this conceptual framework from Geist and Lambin to answer those research questions. So according to them, deforestation is caused by proximate causes, and these are driven by underlying causes. And when we say proximate causes, these are human activities or immediate actions at the local level. And these include infrastructure extension, agricultural expansion, wood and non-wood extraction, and also other factors such as biophysical drivers and also environmental drivers. And these are driven by underlying causes. So when we say underlying causes, these are social processes at the national or at the global level. So this include demographic and poverty factors, market demand and economic development, technological factors, governance, policy and institutional factors, and also cultural factors. And in terms of my methodology, I use mainly literature review. And first, I conducted literature search. So one literature search for forest cover and another literature search for the causes of deforestation. And I used these following platforms for the forest cover: Scopus, Web of Science Core Collection, Google Scholar, and Google Web Search. And for the causes of deforestation, I only use Scopus, Web of Science Core Collection, and also Google Scholar. And for the keywords, for forest cover, I use forest cover, forest area, and Philippines. And for the causes of deforestation, I use deforestation, forest loss, forest decline, land use change, land cover change, causes of deforestation, drivers of deforestation, and the Philippines. So after conducting literature research, I exported all the papers to Kadima. So Kadima is a free web-based tool that supports systematic reviews, systematic maps, and literature reviews. So I have included here in the presentation the URL of Kadima, so you can also visit the tool during your free time. And in Kadima, I conducted my duplicate removal and also the screening of the papers. So for the screening of the papers, I used the two-stage review. So first, I look at their title and their abstract, and I examine their relevance to my research question. So I use this criteria for forest cover. First, the study should cover the entire Philippines. It should be a national inventory, and the focus of the study should also be forest ecosystem. And for the causes of deforestation, the study should involve the Philippines or conducted in the Philippines. And the focus should be on the terrestrial forest ecosystem. After which, I conducted the full text screening wherein I read the entire paper. And for the forest cover, I used this criteria. The paper should have a quantification of the national forest cover, and it should be from 1980 to 2020 or within this time period. For the causes of deforestation, of course, it should talk about the causes from 1980 to 2020. So in summary, I have 130 sources for the causes of deforestation, and most of them are published after 1990s. And most of the papers are also journal articles. So for the forest cover sources, I have in total 33 sources, and 12 of them are editions of the Philippine Forestry Statistics of the DNR, and 5 of them are editions of the Forest Resources Assessment of FAO, and the remaining 16 sources are independent studies. And after which, I did data extraction and coding with the help of the NVivo software. And for the data analysis, I counted the number of broad, proximate, and underlying causes, and I categorized them into single factor, 2-factor, 3-factor, and so on. And I also counted the specific proximate and underlying causes. And I also look at the causal chain relationship of these various causes. So I look at if there's a feedback loop among proximate and underlying causes, and I also look at if proximate causes are also driving underlying causes and vice versa. And I also look at the different causes of deforestation by time period. So I look at what are the causes of deforestation in 1980s, in 1990s, in 2000s, and in 2010s. And these are the results. So this graph summarizes the different forest cover from 1980 to 2020, and we can see here that there are differences from these various sources, and we will be highlighting some notable differences that I have found. So first, let's look at the Philippine Forestry Statistics of DNR. So we can see here a smooth decline in forest cover from 1980 to 1997, and this is mainly coming from the estimate of the 1988 Philippine-German Forest Inventory Project. And from 1997 to 2003, we can see a sharp increase in forest cover, and this is mainly because of the change in the definition of forest from a minimum area of 1 hectare to 0.5 hectare. And this is mainly to be uniform with the FAO's definition of forest. And for the Forest Resources Assessment of FAO, we have here the different editions of FRAs from 1980 to 2020. And we can also see that there are various estimates of forest cover, and they are all different from each other. And this is mainly because of the differences in the data that they have used, their methodology, and also their definition of forest. In this table, I have summarized the data that they have used, their methodology, and the minimum forest area that they have used in each of the editions of FRAs. And you can see that they are different in each editions of FRAs. And let's look at the different independent studies who also estimated the forest cover of the Philippines. So in 1988, we have two studies, mainly coming from Philippine-German Forest Inventory Project and the Swedish Space Corporation commissioned by the World Bank. And we can see a difference amounting to more than 500,000 hectares. And this is mainly coming from their differences in their methodology, their methods, and also their data and their definition of forest. And in 2002, the Environmental Science for Social Change also estimated the forest cover of the Philippines. And they have used here the same methodology, the same data with the NUMRIA estimation in 2003. And still there is a huge difference in the forest cover estimate, and this is amounting to more than 1 million hectares. And in 2010, there's a study by Estoque et al. Wherein they compared the different remote sensing images, and these images have differences on their resolutions and their definitions of forest. So we can see here as well that their estimates on forest cover are also different. And I have tried here to compute for the deforestation rates from 1980 to 2020 using PFS and the different editions of FRAs. And they all agree that forest cover in the Philippines is already increasing from 2010 to 2020. So let's move on to the causes of deforestation. And most of the papers that I have reviewed, they are mentioning at least two causes of deforestation. And this is mainly the combination of agricultural expansion and wood extraction. So when we say agricultural expansion, the papers are mentioning mostly about upland agriculture. And in terms of infrastructure extension, the papers are mentioning mainly mining and settlements. And for wood extraction, they are mainly mentioning about commercial logging. And for other factors, they are mentioning about fires, typhoons, landslides, floods, and climate change. But mainly, the papers are mentioning about fires. So in terms of underlying causes, most of the papers are only mentioning about one underlying cause. And this is mainly the demographic and poverty factors. And when we say demographic and poverty factors, the papers are mentioning about the increase in population, upland migration, poverty, landlessness, and unemployment. And in terms of market demand and economic development, the papers are mentioning about proximity to market, village, and urban centers, and also the increase in demand. For governance, policy, and institutional factors, the papers are mentioning about corruption, poor monitoring, and law enforcement. And in terms of the causal chain relation, the papers are mentioning about demographic and poverty factors driving agricultural expansion. And the papers are mentioning about population growth and poverty driving agricultural expansion. And in terms of interlinkages between underlying causes, I have seen that papers are mentioning about demographic and poverty factors also driving other demographic and poverty factors. So for instance, they're mentioning about poverty also driving upland migration and landlessness also driving upland migration. In terms of interlinkages among proximate causes, I have seen that wood extraction are also driving agricultural expansion. So papers are mentioning about logging, opening up the forest for agricultural expansion. For the feedback between proximate causes and underlying causes, the papers are mentioning about wood extraction driving demographic and poverty factors. And this is also the same with logging, opening up the forest, or encouraging upland migration. And this figure summarizes the various causes of deforestation in the Philippines. And we can see from here that the problem of deforestation is very complex. It has a lot of causes, and these causes are also driving each other. So when we look at the causes of deforestation across time, we can see that from 1980 to 1989, the deforestation is mainly caused by wood extraction and agricultural expansion. And this is decreasing in significance across time periods. And right now, in 2010 to 2020, deforestation is mainly caused by agricultural expansion and infrastructure extension. So there is this change in deforestation causes across time. I also compared deforestation in the Philippines with deforestation in our neighboring countries, and I have seen that commercial logging and agricultural expansion are common causes of deforestation in Southeast Asia. However, they differ on the underlying causes. So for instance, commercial logging in Indonesia and Malaysia is mostly market-driven, and commercial logging in Myanmar is driven by the civil war, and commercial logging in the Philippines is mostly governance policy and institutional factors driven. And the extent of deforestation caused by expansion of oil palm plantation is also different among Southeast Asian countries. It is mostly significant in Indonesia and Malaysia, and less significant in the Philippines and also in Myanmar. So in conclusion, I have shown you that there are various sources of forest cover, and they all have varying estimates, and this is due to the data that they have used, the methodology, and also the definition of forest. I also shown you that deforestation in the Philippines is caused by multiple interrelated factors, and agricultural expansion, wood extraction, and infrastructure extension are the leading proximate causes, and they are mainly driven by demographic and poverty factors, governance, policy, and institutional factors, and market demand and economic development. I have also shown you that deforestation varies in time and in space. Deforestation in 1980s is already different from deforestation that we are experiencing right now. And deforestation in the Philippines is also different from the deforestation in our neighboring countries. So to end my presentation, I have some recommendations. So first, government and independent forest inventory should follow a standardized definition of forests with internationally accepted definition to allow comparison with other countries and across periods. And in developing projects seeking to address deforestation, it is essential to examine the problem having multiple factors that involve both proximate and underlying causes, and this intervention should be site-specific and rooted in updated causes of deforestation. However, the previous causes of deforestation should not be forgotten and should serve as lessons in developing interventions. And for future studies, you could look into newspapers and also project and government reports for the literature review, because I did not include them for this study because they are also not part of the literature search that I conducted. And that ends my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ma'am Jessica, for sharing with us the compelling story of deforestation in the Philippines. Your work clearly shows that we can be adaptive and flexible to do research despite the pandemic. And we hope that this can inspire our students and colleagues to craft research programs and activities despite issues in mobility and safety. For those of you who are asking for copies of presentations, we would appreciate if you can send us or the speakers direct email, as some have yet to publish their papers. Okay, and for those of you who have questions and clarifications, you may type this in the Zoom chat box found below your screen. and our speakers will answer them during the open forum in the latter part of our program. So now, let's go to our second speaker, whose presentation will help us better understand the impacts of rainforest transformation in relation to patterns of biodiversity and many more. Mr. Louis, kindly proceed to the short introduction of our next speaker.
Thank you, Ms. Eileen. Our second speaker is Mr. Neil June S. Lubite from the Department of Forest Biological Sciences. Before becoming an assistant professor, he worked as an international student researcher under the Collaborative Research Center of Göttingen University, Germany, for the program Ecological and Socioeconomic Functions of Tropical Lowland Rainforest Transformation Systems. Hailing from the Caraga State University, Sir Neil graduated cum laude in BS Biology and then took the Master of Science degree in Wildlife Studies at the University of the Philippines Los Baños. His current research efforts are focused on modeling multiple dimensions of biodiversity, ecosystem services, and resilience under changing environments in social ecological systems. Okay, let's all welcome Sir Neil and listen to him as he shares his research on biodiversity responses at multiple dimensions when lowland rainforest is transformed into monocultural plantations using bats as model taxa.
Good morning. So my talk for today will delve on the impacts of rainforest transformations to monoculture rubber and oil palm plantations on chiropteran or bat diversity. I will be presenting how bat diversity at multiple dimensions, from taxonomic, functional, and phylogenetic diversity, responds to such transformations of lowland rainforest. This research is part of the ongoing collaborative research program named Efforts in Sumatra, Indonesia under the Göttingen University. Tropical rainforests are the most biologically diverse terrestrial ecosystems. However, rainforest transformation, mostly from land use changes associated with agriculture, becomes the key driver of the current trend in biodiversity loss. In the past decades, drastic land use transformations have occurred in the tropical forest landscapes of Southeast Asia, leading to the disappearance of natural forests and the replacement of traditional land use systems with monoculture plantations. This photo here shows the lowlands of Jambi province in Sumatra, Indonesia, which undergone a major transformation from forest towards a cash crop-dominated landscape of rubber and oil palm plantations. Sumatra had the largest oil palm areas, covering 6.4 million hectares way back in 2018, and is highly driven by a strong global demand. Such expansive forest transformation to monoculture plantations pose a great concern regarding the detrimental effect of oil palm and rubber on biodiversity in the tropical forests of Southeast Asia, including Indonesia and the Philippines. These countries hold Southeast Asia's remaining primary forests, which are considered one of the biodiversity hotspots, supporting large number of endemic and highly threatened species. Now, the impact of land transformation to biodiversity is quite complex. And for us to better understand the responses, we need to go beyond taxonomic level. In this perspective, multidimensional measures of biodiversity of communities, that is taxonomic, functional, and phylogenetic diversity response, is a cornerstone since it allows linking environment, community structure, and ecological processes. Aside from the traditional measure, which is taxonomic, which in terms of species richness, another facet of biodiversity is functional diversity that accounts for the biological attributes of organisms linked to their fitness or ecological traits, that is, your functional traits. Functional diversity measures variability in ecological attributes among species and provides a mechanistic link to ecological resilience and functioning. On the other hand, phylogenetic diversity reflects the diversity of species in evolutionary terms by considering evolutionary and taxonomic hierarchies among species in the community. All these different facets of biodiversity provides insights into the relative ecological impacts of land transformation to the faunistic community, including bats, which had suffered severe population declines driven by agricultural intensification and expansion. So for this research, my focal organisms are bats, which are suitable indicators to assess the response to land transformation. So bats are ecologically highly diverse organisms and highly mobile animals. Bats have a diverse array of dietary habits, ranging from species that feed on insects and other arthropods to those that feed on fruit, nectar, and flowers. So bats perform a number of ecosystem functions and services. Bats are taxonomically stable and they are reactive to environmental stressors. So while the overall impacts of land transformation into oil palm plantation on biodiversity are negative, relatively little research on this subject has been carried out, particularly on its impact on bat fauna at multiple dimensions. So this is the main questions of this research on how bat community responds across these different tropical rainforest land transformation. So if we convert tropical lowland rainforests to monoculture rubber and oil palm plantations, how does the bat community changes in terms or response in terms of their taxonomic diversity, as well as in terms of functional and phylogenetic diversity? So we did our study in Sumatra, Indonesia, particularly in Jambi province, in 4 transformation systems. So we have tropical lowland rainforest as a reference site. We have a jungle rubber. So a jungle rubber is an agroforest ecosystem where a secondary forest is mixed with a rubber plantation. And we have a monoculture rubber and monoculture oil palm plantations. So in total, we established 32 core plots, of which we did our observations and our bat sampling. I also replicate this design and collected samples as well, data in the Philippines, particularly in Aburlan, Palawan. So my main method is mist netting and harp trapping to capture bats and to record the community. And I use the community data to quantify the different dimensions of bat diversity. So for taxonomic diversity, these are the different metrics that I use: species richness, species evenness, species diversity indices, which I converted into Hill numbers, expressed as effective number of species. I also calculate the community similarities using non-metric multidimensional scaling and compared using Permanova. For functional diversity, it was estimated using species abundances and traits being functionally important to bats. So these are the different traits that I use for this study. So diet for categorical traits, body size, skull characteristics, and wing loading for dimensional traits. So these traits characterize the ecological segregation of the species in the community and give information of each bat species with respect to the different ecological processes they participate in. For example, diet and body size na traits reflect the type and quantity of resources consumed by a species, while wing morphology and skull characteristics are important predictors of many ecological characteristics such as foraging habitat, foraging strategy, dispersal ability, and home range size. So the functional trait matrix together with the community matrix were used to calculate the functional space in which the traits acts as a coordinates, thus identifying a species functional niche. And out from this, several functional diversity metrics were calculated, including functional diversity, functional evenness, functional richness, and Rao's quadratic entropy of functional diversity. For phylogenetic diversity, I downloaded cytochrome B sequences from the GenBank and constructed a phylogenetic tree using a maximum likelihood approach. So I linked this one to the community matrix to calculate the different phylogenetic diversity metrics. So this includes the FATES phylogenetic diversity measure, which is our PD, evolutionary history, and net related index or NRI, which will show phylogenetic structure of your community, either phylogenetic overdispersion or phylogenetic clustering. So in Sumatra, Indonesia, I recorded 470 bat individuals under 6 families and 26 species. So these are some photos, no, of the bats that I captured in Sumatra. In Palawan, Philippines, I captured 660 bat individuals under 5 families and 11 species. So what's the impact of rainforest transformation to monoculture rubber and oil palm at the taxonomic level? So the taxonomic composition of bat species assemblages varied among the 4 habitats as shown in this figure. So species richness was highest in the forest, followed by the jungle rubber, and the rubber and the oil palm plantations having the least, in terms of species richness. In the same figure, we can also see the shift in your species composition. So there are a number of bats. Some bats species can only be found in forest areas, and a number of them are lost, and cannot be found when you convert forest into rubber and oil palm plantations. In terms of diversity, based on exponential Shannon index, which is expressed as effective number of species, the effective number of species declined across habitat with a pronounced decline at the land transformed habitat, that is your rubber and oil palm plantations. So the reduction in species diversity from forest to rubber and oil palm plantations was in the order of 5 times. So that's the magnitude of the difference between these 2 habitats. So when you convert forest into oil palm, transform forest to oil palm, the difference in the diversity is about 83%. So this is for Sumatra, Indonesia. In Palawan, Philippines, the same pattern could be observed. So there is a marked reduction of your species diversity when between forest and your rubber and oil palm plantations. So similarity analysis for bat species composition for both Sumatra and Palawan revealed that jungle rubber habitat clustered and showed an overlap with forest habitat. So this suggests that jungle rubber agroforest provides significant habitat and resources for the bat fauna in Sumatra and Palawan, though less than those of the original forest. Hence, it has been considered that complex agroforests such as jungle rubber are the ones that hold the highest potential for contributing to biodiversity conservation in tropical forest regions. So in here as well, species composition in oil palm and rubber plantation was clearly distinct from those at the forest and jungle rubber habitat. So what is the response of bat diversity at functional and phylogenetic level? So the functional diversity is highest in forest habitat, followed by your jungle rubber. So the same pattern could be observed in Palawan, Philippines. The bat fauna in rubber and oil palm plantations have a very low functional diversity, indicating that conversion of forest represents a dramatic loss of functional strategies. The net loss of functional strategies could be a result in underutilization of resources available within oil palm. So in here, oil palm have the lowest functional diversity value with respect to other habitat types. In Indonesia and Palawan, the shift in functional diversity was apparently driven partly by the reduction of number and abundance of representative species of particular functionally grouped species. So especially insectivorous bats in this homogeneously transformed habitat. So these are the groups, functional groups that are highly affected when you convert forest into monoculture plantations. So by looking at the functional space, there is a significant functional overlap between your forest and jungle rubber, while there is a marked functional distinction between your forest and oil palm. So this result illustrates the potential, again, of your jungle rubber to retain a similar level of bat functional traits as in the forest, and vastly more than the rubber and in oil palm plantations. So when we convert transform forest to monoculture plantations, we can also observe trait filtering. So it may be regarded that those species that colonize or increase in abundance after land transformation provide a similar set of resource use traits. So by looking at this figure, bat assemblages in all palm showed the lowest functional richness and the most extreme trait filtering of all the habitats. So in here, the species found in all palm plantations were closer to each other in trait space than expected by chance. So species absent in oil palm plantations, no? So looking here from forest to oil palm, the species absent in oil palm plantations were usually those with specialized diet or roosting requirements and small home ranges, while assemblages in oil palm plantations were often dominated by a few abundant generalist species. Example here are Cynopterus brachiotis, Cynopterus sphinx, which constitutes about 80% of your abundance in your oil palm plantation. So in terms of phylogenetic diversity, the Fate Index showed that phylogenetic diversity was highest in forest habitat. The same pattern could be observed both in Sumatra, Indonesia and in Palawan, Philippines. So jungle rubber showed a comparable phylogenetic diversity with the forest, while oil palm plantations had the lowest phylogenetic diversity. So the higher phylogenetic diversity in forest suggests that the bat species recorded in forest sites are distributed across a wider range of glades than those recorded in rubber and oil palm plantation sites. Okay. So in short, the Fate Index in your oil palm, it's very low. It suggests that the phylogenetic relationship of the community within your oil palm plantations are rather clustered, or they are closely related. So in terms of phylogenetic assemblage structure, it was investigated using the Net Relatedness Index, or NRI. So forest habitat as well as jungle rubber have a negative values for both Sumatra and Palawan na bat communities. And it suggests, it indicates that a vast majority of the Chiropteran assemblages was phylogenetically dispersed. In contrast, monoculture rubber and oil palm plantations have a positive values, indicating a vast majority of Chiropteran assemblages in these habitats were phylogenetically clustered. So a phylogenetic clustering pattern, as observed in oil palm and rubber plantations in both areas, could be explained as a result of environmental filtering, because ecological traits are generally phylogenetically conserved, and thus more closely related species are expected to be ecologically similar. So to illustrate this phylogenetic clustering, bat species that thrives in rubber and oil palm plantation were mostly generalist species and of closer phylogenetic relationship. So when a forest is transformed into rubber and oil palm plantations, changes also could be observed in terms of their phylogenetic relationships that compose your bat community. So rubber and oil palm habitat are highly homogenized, and only a certain species of bats which are tolerant to disturbance could persist in this transformed habitat. So this is further highlighted in the abundance weighted phylogenetic diversity measure, in which we can observe the big difference in your phylogenetic diversity between forest and your oil palm. Okay, so there's a huge difference in your phylogenetic diversity measure or value when forest is transformed into monoculture oil palm plantations. So to sum it up, rainforest transformation to rubber and oil palm has a significant impact on biodiversity at multiple dimensions. So it lead to simple, species poor, and less diverse community in terms of taxonomic dimension of biodiversity. It also led to a marked reduction of functional diversity, and it also lead to a decline of phylogenetic diversity and a loss of evolutionary distinct lineages. Okay, so the species able to exploit human-modified habitats such as the monoculture rubber and oil palm plantations They tend to be ecologically redundant and phylogenetically closely related. So another highlight of this research is diversity increased with the extent of jungle rubber agro-ecosystem, showing the importance of agroforest for the maintenance of bat diversity in agricultural landscapes. So this highlights the importance of your jungle rubber or your agroforest ecosystems. So the implications, avoiding oil palm development on forest land in the first place is the best option for biodiversity conservation. Okay, so there's no need to convert new forest lands into oil palm. Instead, it should land use planning should be taken in careful consideration. Conservation value of rubber agroforest than monoculture. Okay, so it has been highlighted that agroforest ecosystems harbors a higher diversity, bat diversity than the monocultures, and protection of the remaining forest fragments for the conservation of intact chiropteran assemblages in agricultural landscapes. So there's a need to strengthen the conservation of the remaining forest fragments in order to ensure the intact chiropteran assemblages in these vast agricultural landscapes. So with that, I would like to thank the college for inviting me for this talk and these different institutions for supporting this research, the Department of Science and Technology, the German Research Foundation for the funding in Sumatra, and Indonesian Institute of Science and University of Jambi. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Salamat, Sir Neil. Ngayon ko na-realize na we now have our very own Batman in CFNR. We appreciate your laymanized presentation despite the many technical aspects of your study. I have read your article. I think it's one of the research components on the FAO Agri's webpage. And indeed, both Indonesia and the Philippines are biodiversity hotspots. And the loss of forest roosting areas has a direct impact on various species, not just bats. Thank you again, Sir Neil. So now, who among us is interested in the study of watersheds and climate change? Well, we are in for a treat because our next speaker will be telling her story about the integrated landscape approach to promote resilience in 2 watersheds in the Philippines. Sir Louis, please do the honor of introducing our third speaker.
Thank you, Ms. Eileen. Our third speaker is Dr. Maricel T. Villamayor, an assistant professor at the Department of Social Forestry and Forest Governance, College of Forestry and Natural Resources. Ma'am Acel is a cum laude graduate of the BS Development Communication and MS in Forestry, majoring in Social Forestry, both at the University of the Philippines Los Baños. Last year, she finished her PhD in Environmental Science, also from UPLB. She previously worked with the Environmental Forestry Program as research assistant for various global change research projects, and later with the Asia-Pacific Network for Global Change Research in Japan, where she assisted in the administration of the calls for proposals, review process, and project management. Let us listen to Ma'am Acel's research on the integrated landscape approach to climate change adaptation towards promoting resilience in 2 watersheds in the Philippines.
Good morning. I am Maricel A. Tapia Villamayor, Assistant Professor at the Department of Social Forestry and Forest Governance, and it is my pleasure to present to you my PhD research on integrated landscape approach to climate change adaptation towards promoting resilience into watersheds in the Philippines. And this is co-authored by my advisors, Dr. Juan M. Pulhin, Dr. Carmelita M. Rubancos, Dr. Rodel D. Lasco, Dr. Rex Victor O. Cruz, and Dr. Margaret M. Calderon. Climate change adaptation has seen soaring demands in the last 30 years as the biophysical and human impacts of climate change become greater realities. The Philippines, being a developing country and an archipelagic nation that sits adjacent to the Pacific Ocean, is highly exposed and sensitive to various climatic threats. These are expected to increase in intensity and frequency with the changing climate. The National Framework Strategy on Climate Change Adaptation, or NFSCC, thus emphasized the importance of addressing the country's adaptation needs towards achieving the vision of a climate risk resilient Philippines with healthy, safe, prosperous, and self-reliant communities and thriving and productive ecosystems. Climate change adaptation is defined as the process of adjustment to actual or expected climate and its effects. In human systems, adaptation seeks to moderate or avoid harm or exploit beneficial opportunities. In some natural systems, human intervention may facilitate adjustment to expected climate and its effects. Adaptation is executed at various scales and levels, and its implementation differs depending on the context, such as resources, values, and needs. However, current approaches to climate change adaptation focus predominantly on sectoral and technological approaches. Apart from this, there is little discussion in the literature on how adaptation is realized in practice, as well as the effects of adaptation strategies implemented. Climate change brings uncertainties on how it would affect the linked human and environmental systems and the invisible cause-effect relationships among their components. This warrants an approach to adaptation that anticipates surprises and ensures the continuous delivery of ecosystem services while at the same time promoting the welfare of the people and the integrity of the environment. Towards this end, the call for integration has been the loudest, especially using the integrated landscape approach, which acknowledges the different interconnected parts of the landscape that provides various goods and services to support human well-being. As CIFOR Director General or General Director Peter Holmgren stated during the Global Landscapes Forum in Poland in 2013, landscapes are not just part of a solution, they are the solution. My study seeks to investigate how the integrated approach to climate change adaptation fits in a complex and multifunctional system, such as that of my study sites in Baroro and Saug watersheds, in Luzon and Mindanao respectively. Specifically, it uses the integrated landscape approach to climate change adaptation to analyze the landscape characteristics, climate risks, adaptive capacity, and resilience of Baroro and Saug watersheds. I reviewed several integrated approaches in my study, namely the integrated landscape approach, the watershed framework, and the nested multi-scale spatial hierarchy. Also, I looked into the different theories of climate change adaptation, namely the action theory, resilience framework, the integral framework, and the adaptation as a socio-political process. From this, I adapted the pattern process value framework in landscape ecology of Okdam et al. To demonstrate integration across a landscape and highlight the human values obtained from it. The emphasis on values or landscape services makes the goals of sustainable development or resilience easy to capture. In my study, the landscape is spatially represented by a watershed. My framework highlights that the use of information from vulnerability and risk assessments as basis for adaptation should be anchored on the landscape pattern, its functions, and the benefits derived from it. The impacts should also be linked with the benefits or landscape services, especially through the use of evaluation. Addressing climate change impacts requires designing adaptation options that consider the patterns, functions, and the desired benefits from the landscape. The strategies employed should promote continuous provision of goods and services, and any proposed changes to landscape pattern should contribute to the improvement of benefits or a desirable shift to another ecosystem, function, or service. The act of adaptation, on the other hand, necessitates understanding the dynamics of this phenomenon, particularly its nested multi-scalar hierarchy, the processes involved, and the types and characteristics of responses employed. It should be noted that adaptation is enabled through the resilient characteristics or the adaptive capacity of the landscape, both social and biophysical. Ultimately, its goal is to promote resilience or the continued delivery of services despite the climate change related disturbance. My study was implemented in Baroro watershed in La Union and Saog watershed in Davao del Norte and Compostela Valley. Baroro watershed is located in the northeastern part of the province of La Union and encompasses the municipalities of San Gabriel, San Juan, Bagulin, Bacnotan, and Santol, and the city of San Fernando. It has a total area of 19,486 hectares and falls under the medium watershed category. Saog watershed, on the other hand, is located in Davao del Norte and Compostela Valley, straddling the municipalities of Asuncion, Capalong, New Corella, and San Isidro in the city of Tagum in Davao del Norte and the municipalities of Laac, Mawab, Moncayo, Monte Vista, and the Bunturan in Compostela Valley. It has a total area of 99,866.52 hectares and therefore is considered a large watershed. I applied a mixed methods design following the pragmatic research paradigm and used the following data collection methods, namely survey, focus group discussions, in-depth interviews, secondary data collection, and observation. A total of 295 and 298 survey respondents in Baroro watershed and Saog watershed respectively were selected, using Sokatme's equation following stratification across watershed gradient. 5 FGDs were performed in Baroro watershed and 4 in Saog watershed. And 49 in-depth interviews were conducted all in all, 22 from Baroro and 27 in Saog. Results were analyzed using descriptive statistics and ordinary least squares regression for the quantitative data and pattern analysis for the qualitative data. These are all sewn together using the integrated landscape approach for climate change adaptation framework that I showed earlier. So for the results and discussion, based on NumRIA and Google Earth Pro imagery for the years 1988, 2003, 2010, and 2015, significant land use changes have occurred in both watersheds. In 1988, Baroro watershed has just 4 main land use or land cover types, and this fragmented into 10 land use and land covers by 2015. Saog watershed had 5 dominant land use or land cover in 1988, and this also fragmented into 9 land uses or land cover in 2015. The landscape patterns of the two watersheds differ, as Baroro is mostly covered with forests, at least 65% of its total land area, while Saog watershed is predominantly a cultivated area, which constitutes 87% of its total land area. Social patterns reveal the dependence of almost all survey respondents to farming as primary source of income in the two watersheds. Respondents in Baroro watershed generally have a higher level of education compared to Saog watershed, with 70% and 53% completing at least high school education and graduate degree respectively, and although almost the same percentage of respondents, that is about 70%, has been farming as their primary source of income, more respondents in Saog watershed are engaged in other livelihoods compared to that of Baroro watershed. The stark difference between the watersheds is observed in their income. The average annual income of survey respondents in Baroro watershed is estimated at 55,885 pesos, 0.51, with an estimated annual per capita income of 13,127.52. These figures are way below the annual per capita poverty threshold in La Union at 21,893 pesos. On the other hand, survey respondents in Saog watershed have an average annual income of 130,126 pesos, with an estimated annual per capita income of 34,104 pesos. These figures are way above the annual per capita threshold in Davao del Norte and Compostela Valley at 23,804 pesos and 22,092 pesos respectively. One explanatory factor for the huge gap in income in Baroro and Saog watersheds is their agricultural practices. Survey respondents in Saog watershed tend to have larger farms with 3.219 hectares on the average compared to 0.79 hectares on the average in Baroro watershed. Crops planted in Baroro watershed are mostly cash crops, while it is mostly perennials in Saog watershed. This explains the dependence of the majority of farmers in Baroro watershed on irrigation, an added expense, while 70% of the farmer respondents in Saog watershed have rain-fed farms. The pattern process benefit dynamics of Baroro watershed demonstrate that even if the expected functions of the landscape are similar, the intensity of the activities would dictate its condition and the ultimate value of benefits obtained from it. In Baroro watershed, agricultural activities are dominant but done in limited scope. This yields lower income, yet even with fragmentation, the forest remains the dominant land cover. Saog watershed, on the other hand, has vast tracts of lands dedicated to agriculture, mostly to banana plantation, which leads to higher income yet greater forest degradation. In terms of climate risks, flood, typhoon, drought, and landslides were the risk events of concerns in the two watersheds. Notable events that hit the areas were Typhoons Pepeng and Lando in Baroro watershed and Typhoon Pablo in Saog watershed. Saog watershed was also hit by a dry spell in 2015 to 2016. The ratings of risk events in terms of degree of consequences and likelihood are presented in the two matrices as shown in the screen, and these are coming from the results of the FGDs conducted in both watersheds. The survey respondents also assessed the impacts of different risk events on 17 identified ecosystem services in both watersheds using a 7-point Likert scale rating, with the middle or the value of 4 being neutral or no effect, values 1 to 3 meaning the services were affected negatively, and values 5 to 7 meaning that the ecosystem services were affected positively. Baroro watershed demonstrated higher values, indicating a perceived better performance of ecosystem services despite risk events. An examination of the adaptation performances of both watersheds revealed the greater diversity and more purposive nature of strategies for Saog watershed. The majority of adaptation implemented in Saog watershed were incremental at 54% compared to the 65% merely coping strategies in Baroro watershed. More so, the adaptation strategies in Saog watershed were more spread out across sectors and adaptation types, unlike the skewed distribution in Baroro watershed. On top of this, Saog watershed implemented more action adaptation at 58% vis-a-vis the only recognition and groundwork types or phase compared to the 54% in Baroro watershed. The in-depth interviews revealed adaptation patterns that manifest the personal and practical orientation of selected members of the communities in the watersheds with regards to addressing climate risks. In Baroro watershed, linkages and social capital, as expressed through helping one another, appear to be what they regard as valuable in the face of risks. On the other hand, livelihood diversification seems to be the approach that best represents the values of selected members in Saog watershed in terms of adaptation. Both Baroro and Saog watersheds exhibited integration in adaptation strategies through synergies of approaches across sectors such as contour farming and other livelihood support, enabling measures that build the capacity and empowerment of the community, such as through IEC, actions that promote ecology integrity, such as through tree planting, and cross-cutting strategies through adaptation planning. However, Saog watershed was observed to implement more integrated responses compared to Baroro watershed. Determinants of adaptive capacity include total income, farm area, municipality, and education in Baroro watershed, and total income and municipality in Saog watershed. Notable findings reveal that the value of losses is positively correlated with the household's assets, especially in agricultural communities where the actual assets, such as farm and the income derived from it, are highly exposed and dependent on the weather system. The period of recovery is negatively correlated with income and level of education, and this can be ascribed to better knowledge to manage risks and greater means for preparedness and preventive measures. The municipality where the residents reside also influences the value of losses and the period of recovery in the two watersheds. In general, it was found that municipalities in the upstream incurred high losses and had longer length of recovery to certain hazards compared to other municipalities at the mid and downstream. This could be attributed to the general fragility of upland ecosystems, as well as to the poor accessibility of the area and even the services available to them from the local government. Meanwhile, the results of the OLS regression for the combined variables of Baroro and Saog watersheds revealed that total income is directly related to the value of losses from typhoon, drought, and landslide. Education is inversely related to period of recovery from typhoon and drought, and total income is directly related to the period of recovery from drought. Capturing the resilience of the watersheds through a measure of the value of losses from the risk events, which represent the magnitude of the effects, and the period of recovery, showed that except for flood, with almost comparable values, the average value of losses is 100 to 400 times bigger in Saog watershed than that of Baroro watershed. Again, except for flood, the period of recovery in Saog watershed takes several months to even more than a year for the three other risk events, while it would entail several months or less to households in Baroro watershed. The combined OLS regression for both watersheds, as presented in the previous slides, has shown that the variable watershed positively correlated to the value of losses from typhoons, the period of recovery from typhoons, the period of recovery from drought, and the value of losses from landslide. This corroborates the findings on the current measure of resilience, which show that the magnitude of impacts is greater and the period of recovery is longer for Saog watershed. Based on the findings, it can be deduced that while climate change adaptation in Baroro watershed is mostly coping strategies and less sophisticated than that of Saog watershed, the former continues to deliver satisfactory services despite the risk events. This could be attributed to the inherent resilient characteristics of the watershed, as demonstrated by its more intact forests and community livelihoods that are characteristically less intense and therefore have lesser impact to the environment. Saog watershed exhibited more sophisticated and slightly greater integration in terms of climate change adaptation. This could be an indication of additional efforts that they need to employ in order to obtain continuous benefits from the watershed. The greater efforts performed could also be associated with the losses in the inherent resilient characteristics of the watershed. Hence, in the face of climate change and different risk events, the degree of impacts is greater and the length of recovery is longer. The use of integrated landscape approach to climate change adaptation to analyze the landscape characteristics, climate risks, adaptation, adaptive capacity, and resilience of Baroro and Saug watersheds effectively captured the complexities and multifunctionalities of both systems as a landscape. The framework has demonstrated that the importance of linking climate risks to patterns and functions of and benefits obtained from the landscape. Thus, it gives a meaningful assessment of the impacts, the attributes that reflect adaptive capacity, and the climate change adaptation that contribute to building resilience. The cases of Baroro and Saug watersheds establish that enhancing the inherent resilient characteristics of a system are key to its adaptedness to changes in the environment. When these characteristics are lost or start to deteriorate, the ecosystem services suffer and become more vulnerable to climate risks. Hence, much more effort is required to maintain the functions and services expected from it. Ultimately, rehabilitating and restoring the inherent resilient characteristics of the system will require careful examination of its landscape patterns and designing adaptation strategies across scales and sectors that individually and collectively contribute towards the end of resilience. I thank the DA Bar funded project led by my advisor, Dr. Juan M. Pulhin, entitled Community-Based Adaptation, Enhancing Climate Change Resilience of Communities and Ecosystems Through Participatory Watershed Management, for financially supporting my PhD research.
The part of my acknowledgement was cut. So to continue, I would also like to thank Drs. Josephine Garcia and Dr. Catherine Dudina, who is our outstanding researcher for the 112th founding anniversary of the college, for the assistance in the data collection and analysis. They are also both parts of or members of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am Asel. Maraming salamat. Your study offers many promising research offshoots, and I am sure that this will result in more collaborations and partnerships with various local government units in our country. We do know that capability building is crucial in improving responses to climate risks, from one climate change researcher to another, isn't it? So before we proceed to the fourth speaker, who will share her research experience in biorenewable alternatives, particularly nanocellulose, let us have a 5-minute break. Perfect time for us to do a quick reset, refresh, recharge, maybe grab a quick bite. So see you in a bit. See you after 5 minutes. Okay, we are back. 58 participants still with us in the Zoom webinar. Welcome back to our 2022 Saliksik Hayagan. And we are now looking forward to listen to our fourth speaker. Sir Louis, kindly introduce our next resource person.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Eileen. Our fourth speaker represents the Department of Forest Products and Paper Science. Ma'am Janet Grande is a licensed chemical engineer and an assistant professor. She is also a cum laude graduate of the Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering, major in pulp and paper technology. In 2020, she got her Master of Science in Paper Science and Engineering degree, major in Process and Environmental Systems Engineering. As a Fulbright graduate student scholarship at the College of Environmental Science and Forestry, State University of New York. Her interests are in the fields of chemistry, physics, and engineering mathematics. Some of the research she did was on the UV absorption, capacity of selected lignins, the effect of keratin fibers on Portland cement, and the possible use of bioplastics from lignin. Please welcome our speaker, Engineer Grande, as she shares with us biorenewable alternatives, nanocellulose as conductive fibers, and lignin as UV absorption agent.
Name is Engineer Jeanette Grande from the Department of Forest Products and Paper Science, College of Forestry and Natural Resources. And the topic that I will be presenting to you is biorenewable alternatives, nanocellulose as conductive fibers, and lignin as UV absorption agent. So this is actually part of my MS Paper Science and Engineering thesis when I was studying at the State University of New York, ESF, College of Environmental Science and Forestry, and Syracuse University. So, actually, this is a 2-volume research, but I will just present to you the first volume. Volume 1 is fabrication of cellulose acetate polyaniline nanocomposite through electrospinning, and volume 2 is UV absorption capacity of selected crude and functionalized lignins for use in sunscreens. But I will just share with you the first volume of my research. So why did I do this research? Or how did I come up with it? So biorenewable resources as substitute to synthetic and non-renewable materials kasi lower cost, more environmentally sustainable at saka safer. And cellulose and lignin are the most abundant naturally occurring polymers. So cellulose as the most abundant naturally occurring polymer and lignin as the second most abundant naturally occurring polymer. And they both have desirable properties na pwede nating i-utilize. So cellulose, it has an annual production of 750 billion tons. So it's very abundant. It is a polyhydroxy compound and a ultra high strength of 250 gigapascal. So a polyhydroxy compound, what do we mean by that? When we say polyhydroxy compound, it has a multiple or marami siyang hydroxyl groups in its structure. And when we have hydroxyl groups, it's easily manipulated. So we can react it with different compounds, and then we can functionalize it so that we can achieve the desirable or target smart material or functional material. So first, volume 1, fabrication of cellulose acetate polyaniline nanocomposite through electrospinning. So let's focus first on the fiber-based conductive materials and electrospinning. So the goal of this research is to produce a fiber-based conductive material and through electrospinning. So when we say fiber-based conductive material, just imagine a thread or a sinulid that is conductive. So that's the goal in this research. Fiber-based electronic devices, they have wide variety of applications depending on their electrical conductivity, of course. So they can be used as special clothing or anti-static purposes or electrostatic discharge. They have good mechanical properties, good thermal stability, and biodegradability. And one of the newest technologies to produce fiber-based conductive materials is electrospinning. So fabrication at nanoscale dimensions in producing superfine fibers. So according to Kramaruk et al., it's one of the most efficient in a short period of time and for a cheap cost. Kaya gusto natin siya. Now, to give you a brief background of what electrospinning is, it came from the term electrostatic spinning. It produces superfine fibers. The range is from 10 micrometer to 10 nanometer. So different factors affect the morphology of the fibers. It could be solution properties, it could be equipment variables, ambient parameters, and this is the common setup. No? So different factors affect the morphology of the fiber. So you have to optimize these different properties or adjust. When you adjust one, you have to compensate it with the other. So medyo it's a little bit tricky at the start, but as long as when you get the working conditions, it becomes easier and easier to produce superfine fibers using electrospinning. Now, this is the common setup that we use for electrospinning. We have here the metering pump, we have here the syringe, we have here the needle or metal spinneret, we call it metal spinneret for more technical term, and we have the collector screen. It could be rotating or stationary. In my case, what I use is a rotating drum. So it was rotating in my case. And we have a high voltage supply. Now, how does this schematic of the electrospinning setup for polymer solutions work? So we feed the polymer solution. So we have a solution, we have a polymer solution, and we feed it here. Now, I want to direct your focus on these two right here. So it's a needle. It's a relatively very small surface area compared to a relatively very high surface area for the collector screen. And then it says here that we apply a very high potential difference, which is 5 to 30 kilovolts. Now, just to give you an idea how high this potential difference is, a lightning a lightning to occur, dapat merong 40 kilovolts. Now, ang ina-apply natin dito is 5 to 30 kilovolts. So imagine how high that potential difference is. And maliit na surface area and then malaking surface area. So what happens is that at the tip of the spinneret, charge is induced on the surface of the solution due to the electric field. So when we have a solution here and we control the flow rate, so lalabas dito yung solution. The solution will come out here. And then charge is induced on the surface of the solution because of the strong electric field. And then the voltage is increased. The hemispherical surface of the droplet at the tip becomes elongated to form a conical shape known as the Taylor cone. And further increase of the potential difference up to the critical voltage. So we have this critical voltage. The repulsive electric force surmounts the surface tension force, causing the ejection from the Taylor cone. So all throughout this discussion, ang the forces that we balance to obtain a good fiber is the surface tension from the polymer solution and the surface charge caused by the electric field. So those are the two forces that we continue to balance in order to produce superfine fibers, good fibers. So cellulose acetate, just to give you an idea of how this works. So we have cellulose, and I mentioned a while ago that cellulose is a polyhydroxy compound. So we have these hydroxyl groups or OH groups or alcoholic groups. So in the structure of the cellulose, and then we do some chemical reactions, ice bath with acetic anhydride, sulfuric acid, acetic acid, hydrolysis, and then we have cellulose acetate. So we functionalize it. It's easier because it's easier. More solvent is available for cellulose acetate compared to cellulose, and relatively it's more stable. So cellulose acetate and acetate ester of cellulose synthesized through acetylation of the hydroxyl groups. And the degree of the substitution of the cellulose acetate affects the permeability, viscosity, crystallinity of the cellulose acetate, or the cellulose acetate, the processing. Okay, and then we have also polyaniline. So we have cellulose acetate as the matrix of the fiber. So it's like cotton in its pure form. Cellulose is like cotton in its pure form. That cotton is around 98% cellulose. So if you can imagine cellulose, ano nga ba siya? It's cotton. It's thread. And then polyaniline, it's the conductive material that we incorporate in the matrix for the fiber to be able to conduct electricity. So we have here, and polyaniline has high electroactivity, adjustable electrical conductivity, stable redox behavior, environmentally friendly, good processability, and has antifungal activity. Now, there are different types of polyaniline. I'm not going to go into detail, but there are different types of polyaniline, and the most stable of them all is the emeraldine form. So I used emeraldine form. Now, how does solution conductivity in this schematic diagram? So how does the conductivity of the polymer solution affect the morphology of the morphology of the resulting fibers? So solution conductivity affects fiber morphology. The more conductive the solution is, the more charges it carries, the more they repel each other, causing stretching of the jet under the influence of electric field. And so smaller diameter, better fiber. So the more conductive the fiber is, the better. Often results to fiber that are bead-free, uniform, and have a smaller diameter. Now, these are the objectives of the study that I did. So, of course, the main objective was to fabricate conductive nanocomposite from polyaniline and cellulose acetate through electrospinning, specifically to optimize the working conditions and parameters. For example, the voltage to gap ratio, the humidity for the electrospinning of PANI NCA solution to produce characterizable PANI NCA nanofibers. In other words, I have to find the right mix of these parameters like voltage to gap ratio, the humidity, what is the translation, rotation of the rotating drum that I will use. So I had to do preliminary experimentation to optimize the working conditions and parameters for me to be able to produce characterizable PANI CA nanofibers. Same is true for varying the concentration of CA. I have to find the right amount of the right concentration of cellulose acetate for me to be able to produce characterizable PANI CA nanofibers. And also, what is the maximum amount of polyaniline that I can electrospand, that I can mix with the CA polymer solution? So all of these three, I did this from the preliminary experiment. So I answered these objectives from the preliminary experiments. And then the last three, this is in the experimentation proper. So to determine the effect of varying the concentration of polyaniline, molecular weight of cellulose acetate, varying the electrospinning feed flow rate, and the morphology of the nanofibers. So I have these three variables: the concentration of polyaniline, what is the effect? So is increasing the amount of polyaniline better or not? Molecular weight of cellulose acetate. So I used two cellulose acetate. I used 30,000 Daltons and then 50,000 Daltons for the molecular weight, and varying the electrospinning feed flow rate. So ano kaya yung effect ng feed flow rate, the rate that of how we feed the polymer solution into the process of the electrospinning. Now, materials and methods overview of the study. These are the electrospinning conditions that I determined from the preliminary experimentation. So the voltage that I use is 12 kilovolts. The gap is 12 centimeter. I used 22 gauge needle. Collector rotation is 1,000 rotations per minute. Collector translation, I held it constant. From the preliminary experiment as well, I determined that I can have a characterizable polyaniline cellulose acetate composites, nanocomposites, if I have 25% or if I use 25% Ca in 2:1 volume per volume DMF acetone. So polyaniline amount up to maximum of 0.4%. So these are the parameters for the experimentation research proper. So I used two cellulose acetate. So we have 30,000 grams per mole and 50,000 grams per mole for the Ca. And then panic concentration is 0, 0.1, and 0.4%, and electrospinning flow rate of 1, 2, and 4 ml per hour. Now the characterization is SEM for the morphology. I focused on the morphology of the fibers, although I wanted to test more. Like for example, the mechanical properties, the thermal stability, and all. But well, my committee told me that it's too much for an MS research. And number two, it was in the middle of pandemic. So I finished this, or I was working on this March of 2020, and pandemic hit. And I remember New York was the epicenter of the pandemic during that time. So the pandemic limited my movement or the tests that I can do. But I was able to do some SEM for the morphology characterization. Now, for the results and discussion from the preliminary experiment, concentration of the cellulose acetate. First, I used 10% Ca as the baseline, 10% cellulose acetate in 3:1 DMF acetone. But solution was not sufficiently viscous and I got moist powder instead of fibers. So critical concentration is needed to achieve chain entanglement to produce fibers. So the chains of the cellulose acetate do not entangle with each other because there is a critical concentration that must first be achieved in order to have this chain entanglement. And critical voltage should balance surface tension. Again, surface tension is too low compared to the surface charge. And so the jet breaks up into droplets resulting to electrostatic spraying or electrospraying rather than electrospinning. So the concentration, the action, I had to increase the concentration and then the relative amount of the DMF was decreased so that the portion of the more volatile acetone was increased to increase the evaporation rate of the solvent so that I won't have droplets, I won't have moist powder, but rather I would have superfine fibers. So these are the different concentrations. So I initially started with 10%, but then again, I got moist powder. And then I experimented on different concentrations. So I increased it to 15%, and then I increased it to 20%, 25%, and then 27.5%. Again, surface tension should always balance. Surface tension or chain entanglement should always balance with surface charge. Okay. So less than 25%, the surface charge effect dominates. Okay, so I get droplets like this one. I get droplets like this one. And then at 25%, chain entanglement becomes more and more sufficient to stabilize the electrospinning jet, preventing the droplet breakup. So I have this. But greater than 25%, that is 27.5%, so I use 27.5%, the electric field is not enough to stretch the jet consistently, so results to non-uniform fibers with large diameters and microbead. Okay. And also for the effect of the panic concentration, initially I proposed up to 1% polyaniline in the polymer solution. But what happened is it causes tremendous splattering with no fibers deposited in the collecting drum. So it causes splattering, as you can see here. So these are the splatters. And then I reduced it to 0.5%. Still, there is occasional splattering causing unstable electrospinning. And so therefore, I reduced it up to 0.4% weight per weight of the PANI CA. So higher conductivity, it should facilitate stretching, but then too high concentration of polyaniline, as in the case of greater than 0.4%, caused instability. So large aggregates result to limit in the conduction and affects the homogeneity of the solution. And for this one, well, it's the optimization of the voltage to gap ratio. So I decided to have 12 kilovolts and 12 centimeters. So my E, the voltage to gap ratio, is 1 kilovolt per centimeter. So what is the effect of the flow rate? So to answer that directly, there is no observable difference in the effect of the flow rate. So this is 1 ml, this is 2 ml, and this is at 4 ml per hour. So there is no observable differences because the viscosity was too high that flow rate effects were not apparent. So surface tension is greater than the electric field. So it prevents ejection of smooth and continuous fibers. So effect of voltage and PANI. So at 25% weight per volume, so parehas sila na 30,000 Daltons, yielded beadless and smooth nanofibers, whereas the one with 0% polyaniline nanofibers with microbeads and infrequent macro clusters of the solution. So ito, beadless siya. And then this one, nanofibers with microbeads. You can see the microbeads in it. So may mga microbeads siya. So two possible explanation is that conductivity effects and voltage and surface tension balancing constraints. So effect of the molecular weight. So as we can see here, this one is at 30,000 and then this one is at 50,000. So makikita pa rin natin, we still can see the effect of the molecular weight. So chain entanglement viscosity is greater than electric field for this case because it was not able, or the electric field is not sufficient to eject a continuous superfine fiber. So large suspending droplet of Taylor cone and large diameter fibers. So to resolve, if I would have had a chance and to resolve this problem, I could increase the voltage or decrease the polymer concentration so that I can have a smooth superfine fiber. So for the effect of PANI concentration, so this one 0.1% and then 0.4%. One notable thing in this experiment is that PANI was totally soluble and uniformly dispersed by the solvent BMF acetone in the polymer solution, such that no PANI nanoparticles were like aggregated. And then when you look at it under the scanning electron microscope, you can see aggregates of polyaniline. I did not observe that. So no PANI macro particles. PANI was completely embedded in the CA nanofibers. So it's the same observation as Hong et al. In 2013. So the PANI nanoparticles were completely integrated in the CA instead of just being mixed with the fiber mats, which is good because when we have PANI totally incorporated or totally integrated in the CA matrix, that means it would result to better conductivity in the fiber. And then the electrospun polymer solution with 0.1 PANI resulted to nanofibers with very small beads compared to the 0.4 non-uniform fibers with elongated beads. So for the summary and conclusion, Pani CA nanocomposite was successfully fabricated using electrospinning, and then preliminary experiments showed that electrospinning 25% of the 30,000 Dalton in 2:1 BMF acetone with 0.1% Pani at 2 ml per hour, 15 kilovolts, and a gap of 12 centimeter produced smooth and superfine fibers. So increasing the polymer concentration, therefore increasing the chain entanglement or increasing the surface tension in the polymer solution. In this progression, so at 15% Ca and 20% Ca, so beads only, and then beads with incipient fibers, and then at 25%, this is the one I used, so I got fibers only, and then at 27.5%, globular fibers and macro beads were there in the structure. So 2 dilute polymer solution led to breakup of droplets because surface charge effects dominate, while 2 concentrated solution resulted to non-uniform fibers with large diameters and microbead. So the maximum concentration that can be electrospun with 25% Ca1 was 0.4% weight per weight, and no observable difference sa flow rates. And with Ca1, nanofibers with microbeads and infrequent microclusters, and then Ca2, very large diameter fibers as well as superfine nanofibers. So there was an excessive chain entanglement. So in other words, to laymanize it, when we have Ca1, less viscous, so less voltage is used. But when we have a higher molecular weight cellulose acetate, we need a higher voltage to electrospun the polymer solution or electrospin the polymer solution. Then Pani was completely embedded in the Ca nanofibers. So that's it for my presentation on the fabrication of cellulose acetate polyaniline nanocomposite through electrospinning. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Engineer Jeanette, for a high voltage and well-fabricated presentation. I just remembered that we recently published part of your research in the volume 10 of the Ecosystems and Development Journal. On this note, let me invite our participants to consider publishing your research outputs with us, the Ecosystems and Development Journal. Our editor-in-chief is Dr. Rex Victor O. Cruz, and it is published by the UPLB College of Forestry and Natural Resources. We have slots open for the October 2022 issue, and I will post the contact information in our chat box later. Okay, so I am sure you do have questions or comments, and we will be happy to receive them and forward it to our speakers. So now we move on to the open forum portion of our program. Let me call on Dr. Tomas D. Reyes Jr. to take the lead in the open forum.
Thank you, Ms. Eileen. Thank you, Ms. Eileen. Can you hear me?
Sir, may I request also all our 4 speakers to please turn on their video camera. Thank you.
Rinig niyo ako?
Yes, sir.
Yun, klaro pala. Very good. So thank you, Ms. Eileen. Yan. So ready na po siguro tayong lahat to ask questions. Right? So who are wizards and Intelli witches would like to cast the first spell? Meron po bang magtatanong dyan? Kasi I have here in my phone 3 questions, I guess, coming from our audience. Let me check it first here. Saan ba yun? Okay. So, ang ganda ng order ng presentation natin. Actually, we started with the underlying and proximate causes of deforestation, and then after that, pumasok tayo dun sa effect ng land use change, partly because of deforestation, and its impact to the diversity of macro and micro chiropterans. Yun yung mga bats natin. Tapos meron tayong yung the use of the application, no, of integrated landscape approach to climate change adaptation, kay Doc Asel yon. And dun sa nag-nosebleed ako, nag-nosebleed ako dun sa presentation, even though si Engineer Jeanette tried hard, no, to explain it in a very, very laymanized terms, but parang 20 to 25% lang yung nakuha ko dun sa presentation niya. But I do hope that there will be questions coming from our audience there, no? So the first question is to be thrown to Ma'am Jessica kasi ikaw daw yung unang presenter. The question is this: after doing an extensive literature review, how are you? How are we going to solve the problem of deforestation in the Philippines? Very, very general.
Thank you, Sir Tom, and thank you for the question. And it's a very challenging question to answer, actually. So
Right.
there's no definite answer to deforestation, because if there is, then we should not be having deforestation now. So, but what I have found from my study is we focus very much on what we are seeing, and that is the proximate causes. It's very easy for us to blame the upland communities, the upland agriculture, because that's what we are always seeing. But we do not ask ourselves why they are there. So maybe because they do not have jobs in the lowlands, that's why they need to go access the free resources of our forests. Maybe they do not have lands to cultivate in the lowlands, or maybe they don't have space anymore in the lowlands, that's why they are there. Or maybe it's part of their culture, that's why they are there. And there are also some studies that are challenging that kind of results of other research, because they are mentioning that maybe the impact of those smallholder farmers are not that significant compared to large scale development that we are doing, like logging, mining, and extension of infrastructure. So whenever we talk about deforestation, we always remind ourselves why are they doing that kind of activity. So there are underlying causes behind, and we need to address also those underlying causes, and not only those that we are seeing. And also, I have seen this tandem of logging and then agricultural expansion, and that highlights the significance of extractive activities like logging and mining. So it gives us the importance of what happens after extracting resources. It's not bad to cut trees because it's part of our economy, and also it's not bad to have mining, but then what happens after doing those extraction? There should be this kind of rehabilitation and reforestation, because if we just let them extract it and then vanish after, then this encroachers go to continue the deforestation that started these logging companies and these mining companies. So there should be this plan what happens after we do the extraction. And also, maybe a last point could be, because right now deforestation is mainly about this infrastructure extension. So it's important for us to have this land use planning, that if we say that there should be no infrastructure in our forest lands, let's be firm with that. Let's not allow any development, infrastructure development in the forest lands, and there should be no exception. So it's about the government and the law enforcement that should also be at the forefront of that. So I think at least somehow I have addressed the question, and thank you for that question.
Thank you for that nice answer, Forester, I don't know, Forester Jessica. One more question siguro, because I'm really curious about how you, how you applied meta-analysis in your study. I'm really curious if you have really, if you met problems or issues regarding the method that you applied, the literature review, no, particularly meta-analysis. Meron ba, if any?
Yes, there are problems that I have encountered. Siguro first off, I on the access of the sources of the different papers, because I have seen that there are interesting papers, but maybe because I was abroad then and I do not have access to some of the local research, then I was not able to access the full paper. So that's one of the problem that I encountered. And then another one would be the interpretation of those papers, because they have different ways of presenting. Some are attacking each other actually, and it's you as the author or doing the research will, how will you interpret them and how will you synthesize their differences on their discussion. So I think that's one of the problems when doing the meta-analysis. It's not a problem, it's a challenge, could be a challenge.
Ayan. So, alam na natin, Okrel, kung ano yung gagawin natin when we perform the meta-analysis in our collated list, no, of researches and extension programs, projects, and activities of the college. Now, I have in relation to the question I asked to to Ma'am Jessica, let me hear an answer from Sir Neil. And this is the question po. What are the major challenges you faced when doing replication studies in relation to biodiversity from one Asian country to another, such as the Philippines? Sir Neil, that's the question. Would you like to repeat? I mean, would you like me to repeat the question? If are you there,
Hi,
Sir
Sir
Neil?
Tom. Thank you. Thank you, Sir Tom, for the question.
Okay, okay.
So, very interesting question. So, in doing biodiversity studies to other countries, Southeast Asian countries, in my experience, what I can think of is first is in terms of expertise and familiarity with the taxonomy of your study species. Especially, most of my trainings are here in the Philippines, so I'm more acquainted with the Philippine bat fauna. So when I went to Indonesia, the diversity of bats there are quite unique. Okay, so what's good about my experience in Indonesia is I've been paired up with an Indonesian student who has the who had the expertise in bat fauna in Indonesia. So it's quite challenging, but it's also a learning experience for me. So in studying and having the knowledge as well of bat fauna in other Asian countries. So another challenge that I encountered when I went to Indonesia is in terms of this policy, in terms of permits and other documents. So they are very particular that when you go there, dapat meron kang host university, sort of advisor that will look after you, as well as and a supervisor from Indonesian Institute of Science. So we can think of it as a Department of Science and Technology here in the Philippines. So dapat itong dalawang counterpart na to is meron ka. So in terms of papers, medyo madaming papers ang kailangan i-process, but it has been expedited by the German university since they have the power. So I think for you to study, to do biodiversity studies to other countries, you should acquaint yourself with all these different policies. Now, when I replicate the study here in Palawan, so I choose Palawan kasi yung faunistic community niya is similar to Indomalayo in the region. So halos the same lang sila ng faunistic community. So yun yung isa sa basis bakit Palawan yung napili ko. Ang problem, ang challenge, not problem, but the challenge that I encountered when I did my research in Palawan is first, aside from yung na-mention ko na policy in terms of permits and papers, sabihin medyo matagal, so kailangan mo talagang magantay. And the other one is in terms of funding, so nung nag-study na ako sa Palawan, more on funding na ang issue ko kasi ang funder ko is it's from DST. Thank you very much, DST. So I got 50,000 for that. So it's a 4-month study. So I need to outsource other funding source for that. So yan yung isa sa challenges for me. So I guess to sum it up, based on my experience, yun yung pinaka-major challenges that I encountered. So funding, in terms of expertise of taxonomy when you study diversity to other countries. So you need to acquaint yourself in terms of taxonomy. And in terms of policy, so we need to adhere to different policies, especially those mga protocols na kailangan sundin. So I think that's my response to that question. Thank you, Sir Tom.
Thank you, Sir Neil, for that wonderful answer. Now, there's also one question, I guess, for Doc Asel. Doc Asel, here's your question. What I guess this was actually part of your presentation, but maybe the one who was asking this question wasn't able to hear your presentation. What are some major implications and recommendations based on your research findings, Doc Asel?
Yes, thank you, Doc Tom, for that question. And I also thank the participant that sent that question, because I think I was able to capture it only a little in my presentation. So it's good that I will be able to elaborate that. But I think what my presentation highlights is the importance of ecosystems-based or nature-based solutions in terms of adaptation. And that's actually what would lead to enhancing the resilient characteristics of the ecosystems, so that whatever disturbance or stimulus that a certain system would receive, the ecosystem would be prepared in terms of changes and in terms of adapting to it. So it's more prepared to adapt to whatever disturbance, specifically climate change, that it will bring. And aside from the nature-based solutions, I would also highlight the variables that I found were important in terms of promoting adaptive capacity. And those are farm size, education, income, municipality, and watershed. So from this, we could already derive certain actions to improve adaptive capacity, and therefore adaptation of communities and watershed in general. Like, for example, in terms of income, that means we really need to address poverty so that we could better adapt to climate change. And then in terms of education, then that means that we really need to say improve the knowledge and skills of communities so that they are better equipped to adapting to climate change. In terms of municipality, this means that the access to different services should be equitably distributed among the municipality. So even if it's located in the upland area, which is as I presented is more represents a more fragile ecosystem, then we should not forget them and should be reach out to them through our extension activities, so that they will be able to improve their adaptive capacity and therefore adapt to climate change. And then in terms of the variable watershed, it just shows that between the two study sites that I presented, that is Baroro and Saug, the one with the intact environment, that is Baroro, is more resilient. So in terms of coming up with watershed management plans, we should really look into incorporating more nature-based solutions in our strategies. So I think that's the implication of my study. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc Asel. One more question siguro, Doc Asel. Kasi kanina I've seen you presenting the parang 4 different maps showing fragmentation of land cover from 1988 to 2020 or 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Have you applied remote sensing in that in order for you to come up with those maps, or you just use available resources coming from reliable sources?
Yeah, actually, those were done by one of our able researchers in the project, Dr. Josephine Garcia, and I believe that what she used was Google Maps and the maps available at NAMRIA.
Okay, thank you very much, Doc Asel. Now we have 1 or 2 questions, I guess, for Engineer Jeanette Grande. The first question is this, coming from Doc Eileen. What is the possible explanation for the observed trend on conductivity as panel loading increases? Conductivity increased to a certain peak and then eventually decreased afterwards as the PANI loading is increased.
Maraming salamat po. Kay Doc I po ba yun?
Yeah.
Ay, opo. So, kapag po kasi tumataas yung polyaniline, so ibig sabihin po tumataas din yung conductivity ng material natin. But afterwards, kapag tumataas, kapag masyado ng madami yung polyaniline, nagkakaroon po ng aggregation. So when polyaniline aggregates in the structure, nawawala yung continuity nung interaction ng mga polyaniline. So to a certain level, it peaks and then it drops afterwards because of the aggregation. So that's the answer po.
Thank you very much. Another question is this. How can you apply your research results in the forestry industry?
Oh, thank you po. So actually, I was in contact with a professor from the University of Auckland in New Zealand, trying to establish a research collaboration with them. And that professor told me that there is a company in New Zealand that uses electrospinning actually in the industry. So their product is producing conductive threads. And saan ba ginagamit yung mga conductive threads? Saan ba kinakamit yung mga conductive threads? So these conductive threads can be weaved into textiles and can be made into, like for example, ay mga bed sheets. And these bed sheets, pwede na siyang gamitan ng mga sensors para sa mga bedridden patients. So halimbawa, gamitin natin yung bed sheets na yon para sa mga bedridden patients. Kabitan mo lang siya ng sensor and then pwede mo nang ma-monitor instantaneously yung kanilang body parameters, for example, blood pressure, heart rate, body temperature, without moving too much the patient. So that's one of the possible applications. Now, in the Philippine setting, I'm not quite sure kung paano natin siya i-apply industrially, but that's one of the prospect na pwede nating tignan in the coming future po.
Thank you very much, Engineer. Are there any more questions from the audience? Okay, there's actually a question for Sir Neil coming from Miss Georgia May. And this is the question po. Sir Neil, do you think the same trends will be observed if the site will be monocultured with a certain timber species instead of palm or rubber?
All right. Thank you for that question. Well, there's one way to find that out by doing another research, perhaps. So, we can hypothesize that when we convert rainforest to a monoculture plantation, we could observe a really drastic decline. But the magnitude of decline, is I guess I cannot answer in terms of magnitude, but in terms of perhaps the trend, siguro we can see na magda-drop yung diversity level at perhaps multiple dimensions pag monoculture. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Maganda yung research mo kasi, Sir Neil, kasi it's not only species richness that you have actually shown to us, but also the phylogenetic diversity and the functional diversity. So medyo kompleto siya as influenced by land use change, right? Like deforestation or some other reasons. So thank you very much for that. Now, there is a question here for Ma'am Jessica coming from Denise Camille. And the question goes like this. What are the possible impacts of this information on the behavior of people, the environment, and the economy, and other aspects? What are the possible impacts of this information on the... Okay, so sorry pala, nakompletuhin ko muna. It was mentioned that there was a sudden change in forest cover, but this is due to the change in the definition of a forest. Yun yung 2007, I guess. What are the possible impacts of this information on the behavior of people, the environment, and the economy, and other aspects? So that's the question.
Thank you to the question. So actually, that was in 2003, and so actually they use that increase in forest cover to somehow justify their projects, especially the government side, because they are portraying now that our forest cover is increasing. You can see from the figure, but then if you look at it, there's a questionable problem why they have an increase in forest cover. So that's one of the somehow could be politically used differently when you um, use those kind of information to justify your projects. And right now we have also an increasing forest cover that is coming from the Philippine Forestry statistics and also the FAO's forest resources assessment. But if you look at it, the forest resources assessment of FAO is also coming from the Philippine Forestry statistics. And from 2010 to 2020, there's no independent studies that is also measuring the national forest inventory. So if the government or FAO is mentioning that, oh, there's already an increasing forest cover, and that is maybe justifying that we have good programs, we have good reforestation, we are on the right track, and we forget those other problems that is also found from other studies, especially case studies that are also mentioning that despite of the national greening program, there are still deforestation that is happening. So I hope I have answered the question there.
Okay. Thank you, Ma'am Jessica. Are there questions po kaya? Thank you daw po, sabi ni Ma'am Denise Camille Navarro. So, meron pa po bang questions coming from our audience in our Zoom? Sorry, wala tayong FB Live, no? Supposedly, may mga question din tayo dun sa mga hindi makakapasok sa Zoom. But, yeah. I guess we still have time for the open forum. So, can we call the participants? Doc June, Tiburan, do you have questions po? Wala na? Na-answer, Tom. Okay. So, I guess kung wala na po, I'll return the floor to Miss Eileen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Tom, and brilliant speakers. Excellent presentations and responses as always. We're actually receiving very good feedback and growing interest in your studies. Before we proceed with the awarding of certificates of recognition, can we request everyone to turn on their videos for the second and last photo documentation? Kuya Toti, can you please take charge?
Okay, sige. Thank you, Eileen.
Count ka, kuya, ha?
Oh, wait lang ha.
Relax na tayo ng konti.
Smile. Next panel. Smile again. 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more. Smile. Okay. Thank you very much. Back to you, Eileen.
Okay, thank you, Kuya Toti. Now let's proceed to the awarding of certificates for our 4, exceptional speakers. Kuya Louie, can we project? Can we show the certificates? Okay, so let me first read. Wait. The University of the Philippines Los Baños, College of Forestry and Natural Resources. This certificate of appreciation is given to Forester Marie Jessica C. Gabriel for presenting her research on causes of deforestation in the Philippines, a 4-decade study, 1980 to 2020, at the 8th Saliksik Hayagan Research Conference, held on 19 April 2022 via Zoom. It's signed by our Dean, Dean Marlo D. Mendoza. Virtual round of applause for Ma'am Jessica. Next time pala maglalagay kami ng sound effects na applause. Thank you, Ma'am Jessica. And next is a certificate of appreciation for Mr. Neil June Lobite for presenting his research on impacts of rainforest transformation to rubber and oil palm on taxonomic, functional, and phylogenetic dimensions of chiropteran diversity. This is given during the 8th Saliksik Hayagan Research Conference and signed by Dean Marlo D. Mendoza. Thank you, Sir Lobite. Okay, next is for Dr. Maricel T. Villamayor for presenting her research on integrated landscape approach to climate change adaptation towards promoting resilience in 2 watersheds in the Philippines, given this 8th Saliksik Hayagan Conference and signed by Dean Marlo D. Mendoza. Thank you, Ma'am Asel. And of course, last but definitely not the least, this certificate of appreciation is given to Engineer Jeanette Grande for presenting her research on fabrication of cellulose acetate, polyaniline nanocomposite through electrospinning, given at the 8th Saliksik Hayagan Research Conference, signed by Dean Marlo D. Mendoza. Thank you everyone. Thank you, speakers. Okay, thank you for sharing your time and knowledge with us. Super appreciated talaga namin to. And with that, to formally end our activity, let us welcome back Sir Tom from the Office of the Coordinator for Research, Extension, and Linkages for the closing remarks. Sir Tom?
Thank you again, Eileen. Thank you, Miss Eileen. Thank you to everyone who's here. Before you leave, nga pala mamaya, don't forget to access the link for the evaluation form, and then automatically you will receive the certificate of attendance or participation. So first of all, I would like to thank yung ating mga guests from Central Visayas, Philippines, particularly those from Cebu, mga kauban nato, Sir Neil. Nag-invite ako sa mga taga Central Visayas, particularly Dr. Rose Pascual, nandyan siya. I've seen also kanina si Ma'am Jocelyn Rodriguez, she's from Anorsu. Si Doc si Doc Rose sa city Cebu Technological University. And many others from Sivardec. We invited them. I also would like to thank, of course, the participants dun sa ating Zoom. We reached 69, yung favorite number ni LDA. We reached 69, tapos bumaba tayo hanggang 56. But we started 23. We supposed to have more kung meron tayong FB Live. But there was a bit of miscommunication. So we'll iron that out later. And of course, dun sa ating mga heads of units, academic units, who's here, particularly Dr. Eileen Hara, who also asked questions. Salamat po. And most especially sa ating mga speakers, Forester Jessica Gabriel, Engineer Jeanette Grander, si Professor Maricel Villamayor, and of course si Sir Neil June Lobite. Maraming salamat po for giving your time, for offering time, your precious time for this particular event. Napaka saya namin sa OCREL kasi nag-devote tayo ng time. Alam namin na napaka-busy ninyo, especially si Doc Asif. Ang daming activities, strat planning, and so many things. Gumawa pa yan ng video kagabi. So, thank you, Doc Asel, for sharing your most precious time. And all, of course, dun sa ating mga speakers. Maraming salamat po. To tell you frankly, maraming gustong mag-share. We just selected 4 There are two more. Meron pa kaming dalawa supposedly na include, but we don't want to extend our time kasi yung experience natin before doon sa ating professorial lecture, umabot tayo ng alauna. No, so we don't want that to happen since we have a special activity this afternoon. That's why we actually limited the presentations to 4. So once again, maraming salamat po for continuously supporting OCREL for this kind of activity. And of course, maraming salamat sa mga OCREL staff who devoted also time. Na-pressure yung mga yan kasi we need to do this as a challenge of Dr. Gun Andrada. So thank you very much. Salamat.
Wow, may flying kiss pa. Thank you, Sir Tom. And on behalf of the OCREL team, thank you for attending the 2022 Saliksik Hayagan webinar. To our colleagues at the UPLB College of Forestry and Natural Resources, happy 112th founding anniversary and see you all this afternoon. Maraming salamat po and have a pleasant Tuesday to all. Bye po!